Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In this episode, we'll be worming our way into a weirdly buff supersuit and fighting off anyone who gets in our way in Earthworm Jim for the Sega Genesis. Earthworm Jim is the first game I played through for this series purely because a friend suggested it. I was told it was one of their favorite games growing up, and after playing it, I'm left wondering if the Sega kids are doing okay. To be honest, this game was nowhere near the top of my backlog, and while I was reminded of it when Earthworm Jim 2 randomly showed up on the Nintendo Switch Online service recently, I hadn't really considered giving this series a try. But it actually turns out I own it on the Sega Genesis Mini, so I booted that up and proceeded to actually finish my first ever Sega Genesis game. That's right, somehow I've never actually finished a Sega Genesis game, anything that released on the console, on this mini console or the real classic one. Or a game using that 3-button controller, which was very odd for me to get used to. While I had gone back and bought a Sega Genesis years ago, I didn't grow up with one, and my first gaming device was a Game Boy Color. My first console that hooked up to a TV was a GameCube. Sure, I played a little bit of some ported Sonic games through the years, but I've never really dove back into the Genesis library and never finished one of those games. So let's get off to a really weird start with Earthworm Jim. Earthworm Jim was developed by Shiny Entertainment and published by Playmates Interactive on October 2nd of 1994. Now, Shiny Entertainment is only really known in my mind for Earthworm Jim 1 and 2. Apparently they made a shooter called MDK that I think I've seen the box art for like once in my life, and the Enter the Matrix and Matrix Path of Neo games that came out around those movies. Their last game was The Golden Compass in 2007, which is a spin-off of the movie, I think, at the time, before some sales and mergers that eventually resulted in them becoming Double Helix Games, who were best known for making Killer Instinct reboot on Xbox One. Then they were bought by Amazon and put out a remake of the Capcom game Strider in 2014 that I've actually put a little bit of time into, and it was a neat Metroidvania. Then Double Helix seemed to have faded into the greater Amazon Games studio. In this game, Earthworm Jim 1, you play as Jim, a worm who's described in the manual as being struck by a very large, ultra-high-tech, indestructible super space cyber suit. You overhear a conversation between Cy Crow and the Queen, who wants the suit for herself, and has imprisoned her sister, Princess What's-Her-Name. And after hearing all this, Jim just goes off to save the princess, of course. Now, that's what the manual says. The game, on the other hand, starts with the first level, and none of this is explained. Not that I really needed this explanation, but it was interesting to look up the manual and read this kind of lengthy comic book backstory they created for this. For me, the most standout feature of Earthworm Jim is the art and animation. Jim is super smooth and well animated. He's super expressive with every action he performs, has great idle animations, and really feels at home with the other great 16-bit characters from this time. The character art is just so memorable, and it stuck with me even though this game wasn't a game I really played at all back in the day. I just remember like the cover and things like that. Jim, the enemies, all the levels have this very unique art style, and I was excited to see each new thing that popped up, which made me think of shows I grew up watching like Invader Zim and Courage the Cowardly Dog that had that weird kind of creepy art style going for them. There's even really detailed full-screen art loading into each level, which I wish changed per each level, but it's just the same one over and over, along with one other piece of art that's used at the end of levels. Groovy. Again, the same one over and over. Both are very nice, but there were 2 pieces of art, and I wish there were more, because they are cool to see. But as much as I enjoyed the weird art and really impressive animation, I was super disappointed to look into the creator and artist of Earthworm Jim, Douglas Tenapple, I believe is how you pronounce it, who instead of being respectful, kind, and accepting of others, has a long history of making anti-LGBTQ comments, so it probably depends on how much, if at all, you can separate the art from the artist, or if this sours the whole game for you. Now, let's try to pivot over to a section of the game that I was impressed with, and this is the abilities and arsenal of Earthworm Jim. He's got a ledge grab, which while playing I was surprised to see, with Samus Aran from the Metroid games not gaining this ability till 2002 on the Game Boy Advance. I was impressed to see it here in such an early game, but it turns out games have had ledge grabs all the way back in 1989, seems to be one of the earliest ones, with Prince of Persia and Strider, weird second mention of that in this episode, both having that ability. And this grab is mostly good for determining if what looks like a ledge is actually a ledge, which can be surprisingly hard to tell sometimes, as well as saving yourself from a bad jump. I didn't love that there was no easy way to go back to hanging off a ledge, like crouch down and hang off, so you have to end up leaping off the side and do a risky re-grab for some pickups, which felt weirdly hard for me to pull off sometimes. Maybe just the collision or the angles was off, but you can also use your head as a whip, which is incredibly thin and hard to hit enemies with. You can also use that same worm head as a grapple hook to swing off hooks in the environment. This was also really hard for me to dial in, but once you get the hang of it, it's pretty fun. One of the coolest implementations of it happens really late in the game and is only used 2 times, which is really disappointing because it actually made me better at timing the normal swings after spending time practicing on these 2 columns. Jim can also climb around on the background, which is weirdly slippery and kind of confusing when you triggered it because some areas just don't look like they're climbable at all. Jim can also climb on chains, and you can grab and lift your butt up to avoid enemies with this animation that's way more fun than just pulling your legs up. You've also got a pistol in this game that gets different shot types that I always wasted by completely missing enemies with the really powerful single shot. I never hit anyone with this. And a criminally underutilized worm mode where you can leave your suit and hop around, which is again only used a few times, and I feel like you should have had a whole puzzle solving aspect of this game where you could leave your suit's safety to go into smaller areas and search for treasures or something, but none of that is ever done. It's just used in a few sequences to kind of break up the normal gameplay. The next part of the game that I liked was the variety. Level to level you encounter a bunch of weird enemies, a cat bouncer, a weird devil thing that you can only take out with a giant hamster that happens to be nearby, a bunch of creepy brain monsters that float around, and when you kill them they drop a bunch of tiny shrimp that are impossible to hit, and even just a plain bulldog that just bites you. As long as a random selection of appliances that get thrown at you as well, I guess those are enemies. The bosses in the game also have a wide amount of variety, with the first boss being a trash can robot. Then you end up fighting Psy Crow, but only if you lose to Psy Crow in a space race. You'll battle an invisible devil, a giant booger that's just really strange, and it's just full of different bosses that were definitely interesting to see. The level of variety is also impressive, with more traditional run and gun levels being broken up by things like a bathysphere right out of BioShock, a factory that rips the worm out of your suit. Really, no 2 levels felt the same here. Which brings us to the first thing I disliked. With all this variety, you might be asking, does this stuff play as well as the normal run and gun levels? And no, almost always I had a worse time with each twist on the gameplay. The bathysphere, for instance, while neat at first, gets more and more challenging as the level goes on, ending in a super tight timed race through underwater caverns trying to avoid walls. If you hit one wall, your ship bounces wildly, and you just end up ping-ponging. I died in this area over and over, while also struggling with the brand new control scheme that I was still getting used to. At least this level ramps you up with some easier sections first, and then it gets harder and harder. But a lot of times they just throw you into this with almost no heads up. The invisible devil boss that shows up later in the game spawns right in front of you and gives you almost no time to react. It takes a ton of health, and it felt like pure luck or pure reaction times that I no longer can achieve. There's also the space race minigame, which breaks up the run and gun gameplay after the first level, but then you realize you have to do this in between every single level of the game. Failing makes you fight Psy Crow each time. Nothing changes about the fight, so don't lose, or else you'll have to waste precious health and lives fighting this over and over again. And the race itself gets harder and harder and less fun for me each time. There were a couple places in this game that I just wanted to quit and never come back. One of those places was an incredibly tedious mission where you escort a dog. You shoot near the dog to get it to stop walking, you whip the dog to make it jump, and you have to guide it through what felt like an endless level to the end. Enemies swarm you. These vines that try to attack the dog have a very small moment of safety. Jumps are so close together they require almost perfect timing, and you have to follow after the dog by platforming yourself. Anytime you mess up at all, the dog carries you all the way back to some invisible checkpoint, and you do it all over again. I played this level again and again, and I was just so frustrated and tired by the time I beat it. The other level that made me want to stop playing this game was the aptly named Buttville. This game tells you nothing about an ability you supposedly have where you can mash the jump button while midair to hover. Every instinct told me that I should just be holding the jump button to do a hover like this, but no, you mash it at a pretty quick speed to trigger this. And the level's opening is all spikes, and again, like the bathysphere, you bounce off the walls, so you end up hitting one wall and just ping-ponging between them and dying over and over again. I honestly still don't know how I finished this level. It was tedious, and it was unlike any other part of the game. And I had to look up a video guide to even understand how to do the hover in the first place, which had been not required at all up until this point. And there was no other place where I used the hover to kind of ease myself into a kind of maze like this. I know some people despise tutorials, but what I would have given for any indication of how to play this game, I resorted to video guides, finding a scan of the manual, anything I could do to help me progress. There's a hover move, again, that's unlisted in the game itself. Many games and different level types that left me at a loss for how to complete them until I could just brute force through it and figure it out. Even the levels and backgrounds just give you nothing. The game starts with a junkyard that's semi-easy to understand what's a platform. Then you go to different planets where I could hardly tell what was interactable, what was dangerous, or even just a platform, a hook, anything. Some of this was just a jumbled up mess to me, and as I leapt for platforms that weren't there or hit spikes that looked like background elements that couldn't hurt me, some of this stuff just felt visually interesting for its own sake and not because it was fun or a good time to move around. So right off the bat, I'll say this. If anyone's able to beat this game on normal or higher, they deserve an award. If you turned it down to easy like I did and managed to beat it on original hardware, you're amazing. And I'd love to watch someone just excel at this game because I most certainly did not. One boss in this game is literally invisible, flashes right before it hits you, and it felt like pure luck when I managed to hit it. Other things that look like background art can hurt you. Bosses take a ton of health away, one-ups are extremely few and far between. Even if you get good at the run and gun, you'll be piloting a ship next or fighting a giant bungee jumping booger with a crocodile thing at the bottom. And some things just instant kill you with no warning or heads up. You see, all games are hard, I know that, and most of them were made harder than they needed to be, specifically to extend their playtime. So you'd feel like you got your money's worth by dying over and over, getting game overs, having to start from the beginning, and extend the playtime. I do not enjoy this, and if you do, that's great, more power to you. I've come to terms with the fact that I'm no pro gamer. Luckily, the great thing about the Sega Genesis Mini, SNES Classic, NES Classic, even Nintendo Switch Online, all those places where you can play classic games on modern TVs and consoles have added the addition of save states. For those of you who don't know, save states let you hit a button and save the game anywhere. No more yelling at mom, "I'll be down in a minute, I've got to save." You can just save anywhere, mid-jump, right before a boss, wherever. They allow you to place your own checkpoints, and you should use them. I certainly do. They allow you to progress through frustrating parts that might make you put a game down and never play it again, or get past a tricky spot that you might not have an entire grade school summer vacation to replay over and over until you master it. But even with save states allowing me to save at the end of each level and before each boss, these levels were incredibly hard on easy. On those two specific levels I mentioned that gave me this frustration, and the final few bosses as well, I wanted to put this game down and just never come back. But I made it through eventually. Now, with all that in mind, how do I feel about this game overall, and would I recommend Earthworm Jim as a game that should be on your backlog? No, I don't. Again, these videos are to see if a game after all this time is worth going back to play, and I just don't think Earthworm Jim holds up. It's absolutely crushing difficulty, borderline illegible levels, frustrating and sometimes just plain unfun minigames and level types really brought the whole experience down for me. I still think the art direction and animation is visually impressive, and the first couple levels feel good to play. But none of that outweighed the frustration I felt as I progressed through the game, and it just became less and less enjoyable for me to play with each new level. Now, this shouldn't diminish any fun or good memories you had with the game, nor is it meant to. For me, it just didn't hold up after all these years, and especially with me having no nostalgia about the series other than thinking the art looked neat. If you love this game, please tell me why in the comments. I'd love to hear and talk about your experience and also talk about the parts that I really liked. If you do want to check out this game, as with most classic games, it's not the easiest to find. This game, Earthworm Jim 1, is on the Genesis Mini, as I said before. I got mine on sale for like $20. Then apparently I guess they sold out, and now checking prices, it looks like they've skyrocketed to like $100, which is not ideal. There is a Genesis Mini 2 coming out, which might include it for a better price, but I don't believe the full game list is out yet, so that's kind of a no-go as well. Then we've got the Steam version, which is readily available, but has really bad reviews and is apparently a very bad port. Maybe there's some patches or mods that makes it better out there. There was also a remake called Earthworm Jim HD that came out on Xbox 360, PS3, and phones, but that's no longer available either. But don't worry, Nintendo's got your back, and they released only the second game on Nintendo Switch Online. I did boot that up, and from playing the first level, it seems like it might improve on some of the controls and readability of levels, so maybe that one holds up a little better if you've never played it before. But that's it for this episode of BacklogBusters. Have you played Earthworm Jim? What did you think? Is this a must-play game in your opinion, and does it deserve to be on others' backlogs? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk about it. Also, let me know if you have a suggestion for what game you think I should clear up my backlog next. I'm still working my way through Super Mario RPG, Star Wars Republic Commando, and Tony Hawk's Underground 2, and hope to do videos of those in the future. And if you enjoyed this, please give a like so other people can find the video. And if you want to get alerted whenever I get done editing my next video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and see you on the next video.